Well, Kaveh Guilanpour is the Vice President for International Strategies at the Centre for Climate and Energy Solutions. Thanks for joining us. Look, you were at the conference throughout. I know it wasn't your first COP26. What do you think the legacy will be?
Well, I think that's a good question, and we may not know the answer to that for some time after Glasgow. But I think coming out of COP26, we really have the building blocks to transition for what for a number of decades has been a focus on zero-sum negotiations to one where there's a focus on implementation. And I think Glasgow has set the possibilities for that to happen.
Well, critics are calling it the Glasgow get-out clause, meek and weak. And others say a bridge has been built between good intentions and measurable actions. What do you think?
Well, I think expectations going into Glasgow were very high because of the increasing impacts around the world and also the latest stark assessment from the IPCC. But I think there's also a misunderstanding of what COPs can deliver. They are not themselves the place where ambition is delivered, but they rather reflect where we are, and if the conditions are right, they can push ambition a little bit further. And I think given that and the challenges of negotiating during a pandemic with no in-person negotiations for almost 2 years, I think the outcome actually exceeded my expectations, including, as you mentioned, references to phasing down fossil fuel subsidies as well as coal. So I think in that sense it's a success, but eyes will now be on all countries, particularly the G20, to implement the promises that they've made.
All countries who have general elections coming up and might have been thinking about votes rather than about future generations. You say that this has been impactful, so what are we going to do about it? Is it now up to the individual, or is there still a role for governments to talk about it?
I think that's a very good question, and there was a very impassioned intervention by the Minister of Tuvalu, one of the lowest lying countries in the world, saying that politicians really need to look beyond the next election. And I think that's a real sign of leadership. Can you look beyond the next election to future generations? But also Greta Thunberg tweeted today that people should stop looking at COPs for hope, but actually create hope themselves. And in that sense, I'm very optimistic because things are changing and more people are tuning into the fact that we do need real-world ambition on climate. And without that common consent, politicians don't have much room to maneuver. But I think things are moving in the right direction.
It's not just about ambition, it's also about money. So what about who should pay vulnerable nations for loss and damage from global warming? I mean, how has the climate justice conversation, if you like, moved on?
I think that's an important factor. And I think developed countries really haven't understood fully the symbolic nature of the promise to 100 billion a year. While that is a drop in the figurative ocean of what's needed to actually transition to climate resilience and to deal with the impacts of climate change, the symbolic value and also the real world value to the most vulnerable is really important. So the fact that that hasn't been met is disappointing. But to actually solve the climate crisis, we really have to shift the trillions, as it's called, and align the global economy with the goals of the Paris Agreement. And a work program has been agreed to develop that beyond 2025. So that's going to be really important going forwards.
Well, let's hope that that roadmap hasn't been developed with invisible ink. Kaveh Guilanpour, thank you very much.